They said the seamstress burned in light, not flame. That morning, the villagers of Arua gathered in the town square, their faces twisted in horror as a radiant veil floated above them, pulsing like a heartbeat. Beneath it, a woman's silhouette shimmered and faded, her screen swallowed by brilliance. The elders whispered the same words over and over. She tried to show God's face, but to understand how, Almotara reached that terrible moment. We must go back to the beginning, to when she was just a poor girl with calloused fingers and a restless heart. Her mother had died, leaving her only two things: a silver needle and a warning stitched into cloth. "Never let pride guide your thread," it read. Almotara kept the needle. She burned the warning in her dim hut at the edge of Arua. She sat each night, stitching by candlelight, dreaming of the day her hands would create something the world had never seen. She did not know that some dreams come with a price written in blood and light. Arua was not like other villages. Here, beauty was currency. The way you dressed determined whether you ate at tables or begged at gates. The rich nobles wore robes that shimmered like peacock feathers, each stitch declaring their power. The poor wore faded cloth that hung like shame. Almotara belonged to the second group, born to a washerwoman who scrubbed clothes until her hands bled. When her mother fell ill, Almotara picked up the needle to survive. She had no teacher except her own stubborn will. She watched the master tailors from doorways, memorizing their movements. She practiced on scraps, turning rags into something almost beautiful. Her fingers bled often, but she never stopped. Her mother's last words echoed in her mind: "Needle and patience can mend anything, even fate." Almotara believed it. She worked through hunger, through mockery, through nights so dark she could barely see her stitches. Slowly, people began to notice. Her work was simple but honest, clean lines and careful seams. She told herself that one day she would wear the colors she sewed for others. The Festival of Faces came every year when the rains ended. It was Arua's grandest celebration, a day when nobles competed to display the most magnificent garments. Almotara had never attended as anything but a shadow in the crowd. But this year, she decided to sew herself a robe. She used leftover fabric from her commissions, stitching late into the night with trembling hope. The morning of the festival, she wore it into the square. It was nothing grand, just cream cloth with golden thread forming simple patterns along the hem. Yet when sunlight touched it, something magical happened. The stitches caught the light and seemed to glow, dancing like tiny flames. People turned to stare. Whispers rippled through the crowd. "Who made that? Look how it shimmers." Even the nobles paused, their expensive silks suddenly looking dull. The village priest, an old man with eyes like stones, approached her slowly. He studied the robe and her face. "Your hands are blessed by creation," he said quietly. "But beware, child. Pride enters through praise." Almotara smiled, but she did not truly hear him. 3 days after the festival, a traveling preacher arrived in Arua. He was a tall man draped in black robes, his voice like thunder when he spoke. He gathered the villagers in the square and declared that vanity had poisoned their souls. "You worship cloth and color," he boomed. "You have forgotten that true beauty belongs to the Creator alone. No mortal hand can capture the face of God, for beauty beyond measure blinds the soul." The crowd murmured in agreement, heads bowed, but Almotara, standing at the edge, felt anger rise in her chest. Her rival seamstresses stood near the preacher, smirking, whispering that she thought herself too grand now. The words slipped from Almotara's mouth before wisdom could stop them. "If he has a face," she called out, her voice clear and sharp, "then I can sew it." Silence fell like a stone into water. Every head turned toward her. The preacher's eyes widened, then narrowed. His shadow seemed to stretch across the ground, reaching toward her feet. "You blaspheme," he whispered, but he did not curse her. Instead, he smiled, a cold curve of lips. "You have been heard," he said, and walked away. The crowd parted for him like frightened sheep. That night, Almotara could not sleep. She sat at her small table, trying to work, but her hands trembled. She told herself it was just words, that nothing would come of her bold statement. But as midnight approached, something changed. She was threading her needle when it suddenly snapped in her grip. The sharp and slice rhythm, and 3 drops of blood fell onto the wooden table. She watched frozen, as the drops did not spread or soak. Instead, they moved, slowly and possibly. They slid across the wood and formed a shape. An eye, perfect and round, with a dark center that seemed to watch her. Omotara stumbled backward, knocking over her stool. A wind rose from nowhere, cold and deliberate, sliding through the cracks in her hut. It carried a whisper, soft as silk, clear as a bell. "You have been heard." Her candle flickered and died. In the darkness, she felt the presence of something vast and patient, something that had turned its attention toward her. She did not sleep that night. She sat clutching her bleeding thumb, staring at the eye of blood until dawn light burned it away. The next evening, as twilight painted the sky purple and gold, Omotara sat outside her hut trying to calm her racing heart. She had convinced herself that the blood and the whisper were just fear, playing tricks, but then she saw the figure approaching. A child, small and pale, wrapped in veils of white cloth that moved without wind. The child's feet made no sound on the dusty path. Omotara's breath caught as the child stopped before her. She saw that the veils covered the face completely, but two dark eyes peered through, ancient and knowing. "I have seen colors that cloth cannot hold," the child said, voice soft yet layered, as if many voices spoke at once. "Take this thread. It is woven from breath between purrs." The child extended a pale hand. In the palm lay a spool of thread that glowed faintly, like moonlight trapped in silk. Omotara's instincts screamed at her to refuse, to run, but curiosity and ambition were stronger than fear. She reached out and took it. The thread felt warm, alive, humming against her skin. When she looked up, the child was already walking away, dissolving into the shadows. "Wait," Omotara called, but only silence answered. Omotara could not resist. That very night she sat at her table and began to sew with the celestial thread. The moment her needle pierced fabric, something extraordinary happened. The cloth began to hum, a low vibration that filled the room like distant singing. Her stitches moved faster, smoother, as if guided by invisible hands. When she finished the robe hours later, she held it up and gasped. The fabric seemed to breathe. It shifted colors as she moved, blue to violet to gold, reflecting her emotions like a living mirror. She wore it the next day to the market. Heads turned, conversations stopped. A noble woman, the wife of a wealthy merchant, approached with wide eyes. "I must have it," she said, offering more money than Omotara had seen in a year. Omotara hesitated only a moment before accepting. The noble woman wore the robe to a gathering that evening and became the center of envy and admiration. By morning, everyone in Arua was talking about Omotara's divine needle. Orders flooded in. People called her work touched by heaven. Omotara smiled at the praise. At the coins piling up, she did not notice her reflection flickering strangely in the mirror. Within weeks, Omotara's life transformed. She moved from her small hut into a spacious workshop in the heart of Arua. She hired 3 young girls as apprentices, teaching them basic stitches while keeping the celestial thread hidden. Her apprentices whispered that she was blessed, calling her mother of colors. Nobles traveled from distant villages to commission her garments. Each piece she made with the glowing thread became legendary, shifting hues, catching impossible light. Omotara's confidence swelled into arrogance. She began wearing fine clothes herself, gold rings on her fingers, her hair adorned with beads. She no longer prayed before beginning work. One evening, as she admired a newly finished cloak, the pale child appeared again in her doorway. But this time, the child looked thinner, the veils hanging looser. "Will you finish what you began?" the child asked, voice weaker than before. Omotara frowned, confused. "I am creating beauty," she replied. "Isn't that what you wanted?" The child said nothing, only stared with those ancient eyes, then turned and disappeared. Omotara shook off the unease and returned to her work. lost in her own glory. A visiting prince arrived in Irua, his caravan glittering with gold and silk. He had heard tales of the seamstress who sewed with divine thread. He summoned Omotara to his temporary residence, a grand tent filled with perfume and luxury. "I want a cloak," the prince declared, lounging on cushions, "one that will make me shine like a god when I return to my kingdom." Omotara, intoxicated by the honor, bowed deeply. "It will be my greatest work, Your Highness." She returned to her workshop and pulled out the celestial thread. This time, she used more than ever before, weaving it through deep crimson fabric. As she worked through the night, strange things began to happen. Her candles burned with blue flames. The air grew thick and heavy, and when she glanced at the mirror across the room, her reflection was gone. The mirror showed only the empty chair and floating needle. Omotara's hands froze. Fear prickled her spine. But then the prince's gold called to her mind, and she forced herself to continue. "It is just the price of greatness," she whispered to herself, though her voice shook. Late that night, alone in her workshop, Omotara bent over the prime cloth, exhausted but determined to finish. The celestial thread glowed brighter now, almost too bright to look at directly. As her needle moved through the fabric, she heard something, a whisper, coming from the needle itself. At first, she thought she imagined it, but then the words grew clearer, threading directly into her mind. "Chosen weaver," the voice said, soft and seductive. "You have been given the gift to see beyond creation." Omotara's heart pounded. "Who are you?" she whispered. "I am the voice between stitches," it replied. "Continue your work. Sow the face of God, and you shall never die. You shall become eternal, your name remembered forever." Omotara trembled, the needle hot in her hand. Part of her wanted to throw it away to run, but another part, the part that had always hungered for more, leaned closer. "How?" she asked. The voice laughed, a sound like bells and breaking glass. "You will know when the time comes. Finish the prince's cloak first. Prove your worthiness." Omotara nodded, though no one was there to see. She smiled, even as tears of fear slipped down her cheeks. Months passed. Omotara's fame spread beyond Arua like wildfire. Her workshop became a shrine to vanity. People lined the streets, begging for garments touched by heaven. She raised her prices, and still they paid. Nobles fought for her attention. She dined with wealthy families, her pockets heavy with gold. But something inside her had changed. She no longer prayed in the mornings. She removed her mother's old charms from the walls, replacing them with gold trinkets and polished mirrors. The village priest visited once, his face grave. "Omotara," he said quietly, "you are walking a dangerous path. Pride comes before destruction." She laughed, a sharp sound that did not reach her eyes. "Pride? I call it talent. God gave me these hands. Why shouldn't I use them?" The priest shook his head sadly. "God gives the hands, but the devil whispers what to do with them." He laughed, and Omotara slammed the door behind him. That night, she could not sleep. The whispers in her needle had grown constant, a chorus that never stopped. They called to her, promising immortality, glory, and power. She pressed her hands over her ears, but the voices came from inside. One evening, as Omotara worked on yet another commission gown, the pale child appeared in her doorway. But now the child looked skeletal, barely able to stand. The white veils hung from a frame that seemed made of mist and bone. The child's eyes no longer glowed. They burned, dim like dying embers. Each stitch steals from what should not be touched. The child whispered, voice barely audible, "You are pulling thread from the fabric of creation itself. Stop before it is too late." Omotara stood, anger flashing through her. "You gave me this thread. You said it was woven from prayers. You started this." The child's head tilted slowly. "I gave you a test. You failed at the moment you chose glory over gratitude." Omotara's hands shook. Fear and pride warred inside her. "Leave me alone," she screamed. "You said this thread was divine. Let it finish what it started." The child stared at her for a long, terrible moment. Then, without another word, The figure dissolved like smoke in wind. Almotara stood alone, breathing hard, her workshop suddenly feeling too small, too dark, too full of watching eyes. That night, Almotara woke to a sound she could not name. It was like breathing, but layered, as if 1,000 mouths exhaled at once. She sat up on her sleeping mat, heart hammering. The room was dark except for pale moonlight slipping through the window. Then she saw them, eyes blinking, watching every reflective surface in the workshop. The mirrors, the polished pots, even the puddles of spilled water, showed blinking eyes staring at her. Hundreds of them, thousands. They did not move, only watched, unblinking, accusing. Almotara stumbled from her mat, gasping. "Stop," she whispered. "Stop looking at me." But they did not stop. The air filled with whispers, overlapping voices speaking words she could not understand. She grabbed cloths and threw them over the mirrors, covered the pots, kicked over the water. But still, she felt them watching from inside the walls, inside her own skin. She collapsed to the floor, hands over her face, weeping. "I just wanted to be great," she sobbed. "I just wanted to matter." The whispers drew louder, not cruel, but sad, mourning, as if something precious had been lost. The next morning, a royal messenger arrived at Almotara's workshop. He carried a sealed letter bearing the crest of the queen of a distant kingdom. Almotara, exhausted and hollow-eyed, opened it with trembling hands. The queen had heard of her gifts. She demanded one final garment, the veil of God, a piece that would reveal divine beauty to all who looked upon it. In return, she offered wealth beyond imagination, land, titles, a place in history. Almotara read the letter 3 times. Her rational mind screamed at her to refuse, to burn the cursed thread and beg forgiveness. But greed and pride, those twin demons, whispered louder. This was her chance to be remembered forever, to create something no one else could, to prove she was chosen. She sent her reply that same day. Yes, would create the veil of God. She promised to unveil it at the next full moon. Arrow was square, where all could witness her greatest work. When the messenger left, Almotara sat alone in her workshop, staring at the spool of celestial thread. It pulsed now, glowing brighter, as if excited, hungry. She picked up her needle and began. Almotara worked for 7 days and nights without rest. She ate little, drank less, her eyes sunken and wild. The celestial thread moved through her fingers like liquid light, stitching patterns that hurt to look at directly. The fabric seemed to breathe beneath her hands, rising and falling like a sleeping chest. On the 7th night, the pale child appeared one final time. But now, it was not a child at all. It stood tall, translucent, weeping tears that turned to smoke before touching the ground. "You are sowing light into darkness," it said, voice breaking. "You are pulling the unseen into the world of flesh. Stop before the thread ends you." Almotara, her face gaunt and her hands bleeding, looked up with fevered eyes. "Leave me," she screamed. "Even God will wear what I make. I will stitch his face, and the world will bow." The child's form flickered. "Then you have chosen." It vanished. The needle in Almotara's hand began moving by itself, pulling thread, stitching patterns she did not design. She tried to let go, but her fingers would not obey. The needle stitched and stitched, faster and faster, until Almotara's vision blurred and darkness swallowed her whole. The day of the unveiling arrived. The entire village of Arua gathered in the town square, nobles and peasants alike, all eager to witness the legendary veil of God. The queen herself had traveled to attend, sitting on a raised platform draped in gold. Almotara stood at the center, pale and trembling, holding a covered object in her arms. The crowd whispered with anticipation. The village priest stood at the edge, his face carved from worry. When the sun reached its peak, Almotara slowly removed the covering. The veil emerged luminous and alive, woven from thread that seemed to contain entire galaxies. It shimmered with colors that had no names. The queen rose, eyes wide with greed and wonder. Almotara draped the veil over the queen's shoulders. The moment it touched her skin, the air changed. A vibration filled the square, felt in bones and teeth. The sky darkened though it was noon, shadows stretching impossibly long. Omotara smiled, proud and delirious. "Behold," she whispered, "the face of God." The village priest fainted, and then the screaming began. The veil moved, not like fabric caught in wind, but like something alive waking from sleep. Beneath its surface, shapes began to form. Faces, not one, but hundreds, thousands, pressing against the fabric from the inside, trying to break through. The villagers screamed, stumbling backward. The queen stood frozen, her eyes turning pure white, mouth open in a silent cry. The faces were familiar. They were the faces of everyone in the square, twisted in expressions of agony and ecstasy, laughing and weeping simultaneously. Each villager saw themselves reflected in the veil, but wrong corrupted. Their features stretched and multiplied. "What have you done?" someone shrieked. The veil began to glow brighter, unbearably bright. The queen's body went rigid, her skin taking on the same luminous quality as the fabric. Omotara staggered backward, her smile crumbling into horror. "No," she whispered. "No, this was supposed to be beautiful." A deep voice erupted from the veil, not heard with ears but felt in the chest, in the soul. "You tried to sow the unseen," it boomed. "You have stitched every soul who worshipped vanity." Omotara's workshop behind her burst into flames. The voice continued, each word shaking the ground. "You were given thread from between prayers, and you used it to feed your pride. Now every stitch demands payment." The queen collapsed, the veil wrapping tighter around her body like a cocoon. Light poured from her mouth and eyes. The villagers ran, trampling each other in terror. But the light spread faster, touching everyone who had ever commissioned Omotara's work. They fell to their knees screaming, clutching their chests. Omotara stood in the center of chaos, her hands shaking. She saw her apprentices crying, saw the nobles who had praised her now writhing in pain. She saw the faces in the veil multiply, each one a soul she had touched with her cursed thread. "Stop," she screamed at the sky. "I didn't know. I didn't understand." But the voice only laughed, a sound like collapsing mountains. "You knew. You chose." Her workshop burned brighter, the flames consuming her tools, her fabrics, her life's work. And from the flames walked the pale child, now burning with holy fire, eyes like suns. The crowd parted, trembling. The child looked at Omotara with infinite sadness. "You have woven destruction," it said softly. Omotara fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face. "Please," she begged, her voice raw. "I will undo it. I will destroy the veil. Just stop this, please." The child, burning and radiant, walked closer. The heat was unbearable, but Omotara did not move. "You cannot undo what has been seen," the child said, "but you can choose how it ends." Omotara crawled toward her burning workshop, the flames licking at her skin but not quite touching. She reached for her needle, the one her mother had left her, still gleaming among the ashes. The celestial thread lay coiled beside it, pulsing with malevolent light. The village priest, now conscious again, crawled toward her. "Child," he gasped, "only humility can unmake what pride has sown. You must surrender your gift." Omotara looked at the needle, at the thread, at the veil still writhing in the square. The queen's body was now translucent, halfway between flesh and light. Omotara understood. To stop this, she would have to give up everything. Her talent, her hands, her very name. She picked up the needle, hands shaking, and looked at the priest. "Tell me what to do. Tell me what to do." The priest's voice was weak but steady. "Pierce your own pride. Spill your blood willingly, and perhaps the thread will release its hold." Omotara held the glowing needle above her left palm. Her hands, the hands that had created such beauty and such horror, trembled violently. She thought of her mother, of the warning she had burned. She thought of the pale child who had tested her and found her wanting. She thought of all the souls trapped in the veil, suffering because of her ambition. "Forgive me," she whispered, and she drove the needle through her palm. Pain exploded up her arm, white and pure. Blood welled from the wound, but instead of falling, it transformed. The drops became red thread, glowing just as brightly as the celestial kind. The red threads floated upward, spinning through the air, wrapping around the veil in the square. Slowly, agonizingly, the faces began to fade. The screaming quieted. The queen's body solidified again, and she collapsed, breathing but unconscious. But the veil was not destroyed. It still pulsed with terrible power. Omotar's sacrifice had loosened the grip, but it was not enough, not nearly enough. The burning child stepped forward, standing now at the center of the square. The villagers finally understood this was no child, never had been. Its form shifted, growing taller, wings of light unfurling from its back. Eyes like suns gazed down at Omotar with unbearable compassion. "You were never chosen to see his face," the being said, voice now layered with harmonies that made reality tremble, only to reflect it in kindness, in humble service, in love given without seeking glory. Omotar sobbed, clutching her bleeding hand. "I just wanted to matter. I wanted to be remembered." The being knelt, its radiance dimming slightly so she could bear to look. "All are remembered," it said softly, "but some are remembered as warnings." It reached out one glowing finger and touched Omotar's forehead. In that instant, she saw everything. She saw the thread for what it truly was. Borrowed life, stolen breath, the very fabric of souls who had prayed and not yet received answers. She saw herself as she truly was, small, broken, hungry for validation. And she saw what she had become, a thief of light, a weaver of suffering. "No," she whispered, broken. "No, please." The being's finger remained on Omotar's forehead, and light poured into her, not gentle light, but searing truth, burning away every lie she had told herself. Her eyes regained focus, cleared of the fever that had consumed her for months. But the gift of sight came with a curse. She could now see what she had created, truly see it. The veil in the square was not just cloth. It was a doorway, half opened, between the world of flesh and the world of spirit. Through it, she could see writhing shapes, souls trapped between realms, screaming silently, all because she had pulled thread from where it should never be touched. The being released her and stood. "Watch," it commanded. "Watch what your pride has burst." The veil suddenly erupted in flames, white and gold, consuming itself and everything it had touched. The queen's body turned to ash, then light, then nothing. The nobles who had commissioned Omotar's cursed garments felt their clothes disintegrate, leaving them bare and weeping. Omotar's workshop collapsed completely, flames rising like wings into the darkening sky. She wanted to look away, but the being held her gaze fixed. "Remember this," it whispered, and Omotar knew she would, for whatever remained of her life. Morning came to Arua as if nothing had happened. The villagers woke slowly, confused, their heads aching with phantom memories. They gathered in the town square and found only ruins, the burned remains of a workshop they could not remember. Children played around the ashes, laughing. The adults frowned, trying to recall why they felt such unease. The queen's body was never found. Her attendants returned home claiming she had simply vanished, though none could remember her face clearly anymore. The nobles who had worn Omotar's garments woke with empty wardrobes, no memory of what they had lost. In the center of the ruins, half buried in ash, lay a single silver needle. It gleamed in the morning sun, beautiful and untouched by flame. A small girl found it and picked it up. "Whose is this?" she asked her mother. Her mother frowned, searching her memory. I don't know. There was someone, wasn't there? Someone who sewed." But the memory slipped away like water through fingers. The needle was placed on a shelf in the village gathering house, a mystery no one could solve. And Omotar's name was never spoken again, because no one could remember it had ever existed. At dawn, as the sun painted Arua in shades of gold and amber, the pale child appeared one final time. It walked through the village unseen, its form now gentle, no longer burning. It paused at the gathering house, and looked at the silver needle on the shelf. When pride tries to shape the divine, it whispered to the wind, "Creation forgets the creator." The words drifted through the village, heard by no one yet felt by everyone. A warning carved into the morning air. The child continued walking, passing through the market where seamstresses worked at their tables, humble and content. They would never know the story of the girl who tried to stitch God's face. They would never know the price of such ambition. The sun rose higher. It's like touching the runes one last time. The silver needle on the shelf began to glow faintly at first, then brighter, and then, like morning mist, it dissolved into dust, carried away by the wind, scattered across Arua like a forgotten prayer. In the end, nothing remained. No name, no memory, only the lesson, whispered by grandmothers to restless children: be grateful for your gifts, and never reach for what was never meant to be held.